While some might think that a visual novel can be developed in just a couple of months, it's not rare for them to take multiple years until their full completion. It's also not rare for these development cycles to reach the 5 or even 10-year mark, although lately we have been seeing highly anticipated titles such as Tsukihime Remake or the upcoming Sakutoki finally being released. Among these, thought to be vaporware visual novels, there was also today's game, Anonymous Code, the next installment in the popular science adventure games, whose announcement dates as far back as 7 years ago. But have those 7 years been worth the wait, or is the game not worth hacking around with? Our main man Marin is here to find out. Just to disclose, this is a review of the Japanese version. The English language localization is releasing next year. This review is to see if it's going to be worth the wait. The story takes place in Tokyo, 2036, starring Pollen as the protagonist. He is a hacker who lives by taking the occasional job request, helping those in need, alongside his partner Cross. He does so reluctantly though, as he doesn't consider hacking to be his main goal in life. One day, while he's hanging around with his friend, he claims that he actually has a girlfriend, so they tell him to prove it. He sets up a date with his non-existent girlfriend, hoping they would at some point lose interest. But right when he's about to confess the truth, a young girl appears in front of him, seemingly playing along with his bluff. The two of them run off to a nearby park where Pollen finds out that the girl, now using the fake girlfriend's name Momo, is actually being chased by a shadowy organization. They try to shake them off, but eventually Momo is caught. Pollen, on the other hand, manages to make his escape thanks to the help of a mysterious man. Right when he is completely losing hope, a strange menu appears in front of him. It's the same save and load menu that one would see on a video game. Immediately after hitting the load button, he realizes this isn't any regular AR application, as he is now being sent back to the past, when he and Momo were still being pursued. With this new chance in his hands, he tries to save Momo, this time for good, and find out why she's being chased. The main gimmick of this game is the save load system, which essentially is just time travel, but now with a meta twist to it. It's no doubt an interesting concept with quite a lot of potential, and generally speaking, the plot made great use of it. Seeing the protagonist going back in time with the knowledge needed to surpass the hardships he was faced with was consistently satisfying. Likewise, so were the moments where you instinctively realized the game wanted you to use the feature and made proper use of it. During those times, it felt like everything the game was going for simply clicked, creating a great narrative flow between your actions and Pollen's. That is, of course, when you realize the game wanted you to use them, because at times it was rather ambiguous. More often than not, I would have to load an autosave after a game over, only to spam the button on every single line until it finally worked. Fortunately, the game more or less gives you hints on the game over screens on how to progress forward, but there was one moment in the final act that I thought was perhaps a bit too obscure, and the same could probably be said about the true ending. Abstruse gameplay systems aren't anything new for the science adventure series, but I was kind of hoping this would be the first time I could clear one without a guide, but I guess it just wasn't meant to be. That being said, these frustrations didn't take away from the fact that when it came to exciting action set pieces, this game truly shone, in great part thanks to its dynamic presentation. Similarly, the story nor the pacing never truly slowed down. It was a constant chain of action sequences followed by plot revelations, but unfortunately some sacrifices were made along the way, mainly the slice of life scenes. I know quite a few complained about their overabundance of them in Robotics Notes, but the moment you take them away, it becomes immediately clear why they are so needed. Because without them, the characters' depth and their bonds seriously suffered. The one character that made this the clearest was none other than Momo herself. Even though she received quite a few character development scenes, they were so few and far between that she ended up being a forgettable and formulaic main heroine. Pollen more or less bore the same fate. He is just a run-of-the-mill sci-fi adventure protagonist through and through. But at the very least they did receive some attention, because the character development of the side characters was pretty much non-existent. Characters such as Cross, Wind, and Kaoru were fully devoid of anything resembling a personality. Honestly, a wet cardboard box might have been more charmful than these guys. There was also one character later on whose sole existence was to spew exposition and to constantly remind you of how great friends she was with one character of the series, which very quickly grew tiresome. There were also a couple of side characters that, even though had their own sprites, they bafflingly had barely any screen time at all, such as Win's AR waifu, or the bike mechanics, one of whom I'm fairly sure had only 3 lines of dialogue in the whole game. I'm honestly not sure why they were included in this game to begin with. I will say though that there were 2 of them that I actually deeply enjoyed, particularly Nono and Bambi. Nono's high-spirited liveliness and constant puns brought a much needed contrast to the dull atmosphere other characters exuded. As for Bambi, she really surprised me with her character development. When I first saw her and the Cyberforce doll squad, I was fully anticipating them to be one-dimensional joke characters, but she's one of the few whose personality and relationship with the MC nicely evolved alongside the plot. It's just a shame that these 2 characters essentially vanished from the story once the final act kicked in. And speaking of which, this part was a bit of a letdown. First of all, I've often had the impression that the sci-fi adventure games always struggle at creating engaging villains, and Anonymous Code has to be the worst offender. This time they range from generic to straight up insufferable. I was also left with the impression that the game lacked that one memorable moment that these games are known for. Admittedly, there is a scene that gets fairly close to that, but in my opinion, it just wasn't enough. This feeling of dissatisfaction also applied to the true end route, as it was so rushed that its overall impact was close to none. It gave the impression that both the game's fast pacing and its somewhat rushed final act have to do with the overall length itself, since it only takes about 20 to 25 hours to reach the ending, a considerable step down from other games in the series. In a way, this works in the game's favour, as it doesn't overstay its welcome, but I simply can't shake the feeling it would have been better if it spent a few more hours exploring the characters and further developing some of its plot elements. On a side note, I should also mention that this game ties to the main series are relatively loose. Outside of one character that gets mentioned here and there, there's really not that much to highlight, and even then, the character's role in the plot is minuscule. You definitely shouldn't go into this game expecting new lore revelations or anything similar. Although this also means that if you're a newcomer to the series, you can easily play this game as a standalone experience without worrying about references going over your head. As far as presentation and overall production values go, it's clear that Anonymous Code is one step ahead of its competition. The quality and general frequency of the CGs is quite high. On top of that, the game presents some of its more action-focused scenes as comic vignettes, which certainly adds a lot of excitement to them. There are also some other really neat touches, such as the UI working as the in-game AR interface. If there's one part I wasn't fully sold on, it has to be the sprites themselves. I felt their quality was a little bit all over the place, with some of the characters looking drastically different from their counterparts seen in the CGs. Same goes for the way they are animated. Some of the animations look really smooth and natural, while others feel overly exaggerated and at times even uncanny. There were also a couple of other minor gripes I had with the general production of the game, such as the backlog being unavailable at times, or it being cleared after each chapter change. Music-wise, however, Takeshi Abo delivered yet another stellar OST, although I'm starting to believe that man is physically incapable of doing otherwise, so this probably isn't that surprising. Overall, despite having its shortcomings, I still found Anonymous Code to be a rather enjoyable experience despite the flaws that I've laid out. The save and load premise is certainly a unique take on time travel, and when the gameplay mechanics and story properly meshed together, it was almost cathartic. It's just that as a whole, the game is in need of both memorable characters and memorable moments. For what it is, it's genuinely an engrossing ride, albeit one that, unlike other entries in this series, likely won't leave much of a lasting impression. A 7.5 out of 10. Thanks to Miriam for writing this review. Go check him out on Twitter and check out some of his other written content, the Loopers review, and a lovely retrospective on the Leaf series of visual novels. Apologies for my voice, I don't know what's wrong with it. I just woke up this morning and my voice just isn't working, so sorry about that. But be sure to check out my brand new channel, A Bit More Jordan, where my voice is certainly working much better. You'll find a lot more me over there.